Good morning, everybody, and thank you for coming today. This is the day of the Iowa caucuses, and we thought it would be a good time to focus on preparations in Wisconsin for elections. And probably the biggest change is this will be, since February 2012, the first statewide election on February 16th that will be done with photo ID. In-person absentee voting started in Wisconsin today. People are starting to pay attention to elections, and I think the message we want to convey is for all voters, we want to encourage them to participate in the process, and that means, as we've said for years, you need to be prepared. Preparation this time around means making sure that you have the appropriate identification with a picture that allows you to vote both in-person absentee or at the polls. We have 4 major election events this time. We have our February primary coming up in 2 weeks. We have the April 5th presidential preference election, and I think it will still be a very interesting time. We have our August partisan primary, and then there's the general election in November, which includes the presidential election. All of these we're going to see varying amounts of turnout. We think it's important before, as the election season starts, to remind people about the need to have picture ID when you get to the polls on Election Day. We've already had 29 special elections with the photo ID requirement, starting in May and June of 2015. They've been held in 117 different municipalities across the state and in 14 counties. We've learned a lot from those. We've been monitoring them. They've been relatively low turnout. We've had very few provisional ballots, by very few, under 10 total, where people didn't have their ID at the time. But as we get into bigger turnout elections and statewide elections, we know it's important for people to be aware and to be prepared. Most people already have the identification that they need: a Wisconsin driver's license, a state-issued ID from the Department of Transportation, a military ID, and a passport are probably the most common forms of ID. In addition, student IDs are valid for voting, but they do require a few more things. Generally, with your regular IDs, you do not have to have a current address. With student IDs, they have to be signed by the student. They have to have an issue date, an expiration date, and they have to be accompanied by a second document. They're the only ones that have a second requirement, and that is a certificate from the university showing that that student is currently enrolled during the period that the ID is valid for. If you don't have an ID, the Department of Transportation has a program in place to assist people. Even if you don't have a birth certificate, they will do some of the research for you. That's a program that the Department of Transportation has been working on, and I would encourage you, if you want to follow up, to find out some more information from them. As I said, the ID that you use does not have to necessarily be current today or have a current address. It has to be current as of our last general election, so it has to be current as of November 4th of 2014. We've been doing a lot to focus on the ID ever since it was passed in 2011. We have had our own Speakers Bureau. We've done a number of presentations. I'm going to turn this over to Megan McCord-Wolf in just a few minutes. Since the photo ID law has been in place, she and some of our other staff have done 15 separate presentations, including 2 in the last week that were very well received, where we talked with groups representing people with disabilities and representing elderly voters to get them as much information as possible on how they can work on on how to get a voter ID. Since this started, we probably have done over 350 in-person presentations, and we developed a lot of informational packets to distribute. I'm going to have Megan talk a little bit about some of the resources that we have available for this, come back and talk about what we can do going forward, and then answer any questions. So with that, let me turn it over to Megan McCord-Wolf.
Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, our outreach approach for the 2016 election cycle has been to prepare voters. We've been focusing on holding events with representatives for groups that work directly with voters. We go out and train the representatives who then train the people that work in their organizations who then work directly with those voters. This approach really allows us to customize the information to the audience and to answer questions that are specific to the voting situations these organizations encounter. For example, last week we held an event with an organization that works directly with elderly and disabled voters, and we had over 40 minutes of questions. Many of these questions were about voters who no longer have a valid driver license or state ID, and they're worried about how those voters are going to get to the DMV to get an ID to vote. And this is also a very popular question that we receive in our office. So as you are preparing for the 2016 elections, you may also be helping friends and family get ready for those elections as well. And it's important to note that there are some voters who do not need to provide a photo ID when voting absentee by mail. Indefinitely confined voters, so those voters who have a hard time getting to the polls due to age, illness, infirmity, or disability, do not need to show a photo ID when getting their absentee ballot by mail. Voters who fall into this category simply need to indicate on their absentee ballot request form that they are indefinitely confined, and they will automatically receive an absentee ballot for every election. So perhaps you or a relative or friend falls into this category and you're worried about getting to the DMV in order to get an ID to vote. Just remember that if you have a hard time getting to the polls because of age, illness, infirmity, or disability, you may not need to provide a photo ID when voting by mail. There are other voters who do not need to show a photo ID when receiving an absentee ballot by mail, and those include our active duty military personnel who are away from home, our permanent overseas voters, and our confidential voters. And if you have any questions about if you qualify or how to receive an absentee ballot, please contact the G.A.B. or your municipal clerk. Now, if you're going to be going to the polls this year to vote, there's 3 simple steps that you need to follow to be prepared to get your ballot on Election Day. The first step is to state your name and your address to the designated poll worker. Next is to show your acceptable photo ID. And then third, you'll sign the poll book next to your name. If you follow these 3 simple steps, state it, show it, and sign it, you'll be issued a ballot at the polls. Now, if you get to the polls this year and you're not quite as prepared for Election Day as you had intended to be, and you get to the polls only to realize that you forgot to bring your acceptable photo ID or that you do not have one of the acceptable IDs for voting, there are still options. If you do not have the acceptable ID with you, you'll be offered what's called a provisional ballot. You'll make your selections on your provisional ballot just like you would a regular ballot. The ballot's then put into a provisional ballot envelope, and the election official will hold on to it. You will then need to bring your photo ID in order for your ballot to be counted. You can either return to the polling place before the polls close at 8 p.m. and provide your photo ID, or you have until 4 p.m. on the Friday after the election to come into your municipal clerk's office and provide your photo ID. If you do this, your provisional ballot will be counted. If you're looking for more information to prepare for the 2016 elections, you can check out some of the G.A.B's resources. One resource is you can visit the myvote.wi.gov website. Here you can find out if you're registered to vote at your current address. You can also find your polling place and view a sample ballot. Another great resource is the G.A.B's photo ID website, bringit.wi.gov, and this will show you all of the information you need to know about the voter photo ID law, the exceptions to the law, and how to get a state of Wisconsin ID card if you don't already have an acceptable ID. On the bringit.wi.gov website, you'll also find informational videos, TV ads, radio ads, brochures, and handouts. We encourage you to take a look at this information available on our websites to make sure that you are ready for Election Day. I'm now going to turn it back over to Kevin to talk about more of the ways that you can help us spread the word about photo ID and make sure that everybody's ready to vote in 2016.
Thank you, Megan. Just to follow up on things, we're going to show you a couple of our resources that we've developed. The Government Accountability Board spent over $700,000 developing brochures, radio, television, advertising as we got into 2011. In 2015, when the photo ID law came back into place, staff worked hard to make sure we had everything updated because there were some changes in the process as a result of the Wisconsin Supreme Court decision relating to this. We spent some additional money updating all of our advertising to reflect that. We will spend a little bit more when the Government Accountability Board transitions into the Elections Commission to change some of the taglines on our advertising as well. But we have a lot of resources that have been very effective since April and were effective prior to that time. We'd like to show you some of those. We will be reaching out to try and promote media organizations utilizing these resources, but it's the same things we're giving to our local clerks, to the various groups that Megan and the rest of the team are reaching out and talking with. So I'll have Reed give you some things on our smart board here, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions.
So on the page, if you look at, there's a multimedia link there, and you will see that will take you to a page that has some informational videos, TV ads, posters, brochures, and radio ads. Here is one of the TV spots.
Most Wisconsin voters already have a photo ID.
If you don't,
you can get a free Wisconsin state ID
before the next election.
To get your free ID, head to the Division of Motor Vehicles
and take a few documents with you.
Proof of your name, date of birth, and U.S. citizenship, like a certified birth certificate. If you don't have a birth certificate or other documents, the DMV can still help you get a free ID for voting. For a complete list of the documents you can use, visit bringit.wisconsin.gov. And don't forget to bring your ID to the ballot.
Another one we have is
Let's find out what to expect at the polls. Voting in Wisconsin will be a little different. That's because now everyone is bringing it to the ballot. A Wisconsin driver license, a passport, or military ID. These are just a few of the photo IDs you can use to vote in Wisconsin. Remember to bring yours. It's the first step to a successful experience at the polls. Once you're there, checking in is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Hold on, you'll see what we mean. First, you state your name and address. An official will verify the information in the poll book. Next, you'll need to show your photo ID so that poll workers know you really are you. Finally, you sign it. Your signature goes right next to your name and address in the poll book. Now you're ready to vote. Just remember that some people won't be as prepared for these changes as you are, so try to be patient. The lines may be a little longer this year. Of course, not everyone votes at a polling place. For more information about how Wisconsin's new voter photo ID law affects elderly, absentee, and special needs voters, visit bringit.wisconsin.gov. Sponsored by the Wisconsin Government Accountability Board. Also, find us online at G.A.B.wi.gov. Thank you.
You are the only participant in the conference. Please press any key on your keypad to remain in conference.
Actually, you're all participating as well. This is the time, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask about this, we really want to emphasize in all of our communications, and if you call us up asking about voter turnout, we're going to say, be prepared, bring it to the ballot. You might even hear the state it, show it, sign it getting worked into our conversations, but we want to do as much to remind people, particularly as we start the election cycle, to be prepared to bring that ID when they come to vote. So I'll be happy to take any questions.
There hasn't been any funding provided for paid advertisements to educate people about voter ID. In your view, would that be helpful for lawmakers to provide that? Is that something that's any kind of an omission in terms of, an effort on the state's behalf to educate voters that this requirement is in place?
Well, anything would be helpful. That's one of the reasons why we're having this press conference. We updated everything because we wanted to make the tools available. The board discussed the process. We recognized that the money the legislature gave us, we spent a lot of it to develop these processes, and we gave back money at the end when photo ID was put on hold. It wasn't put into our budget because it was on hold at the time. It has been discussed publicly. We've had people raise the issue. The legislature's obviously been focused on a number of different things. If money's available, we are prepared to go forward. As we're encouraging voters to be prepared, we're prepared to go forward.
Have you been fielding any questions from clerks? I mean, do they feel relatively well prepared at this point?
We've gotten a lot of questions. One of the things we did with these special elections, the 29 special elections we had, is we tried to monitor how they went, reach out to the clerks afterwards. What was your experience on this? What's the kind of feedback that you're getting? We've had a couple of webinars that we train our clerks on where we familiarize them with the resources that are available. Most of them, we spent a lot of time in 2011, 2012 getting them ready. So a lot of the work that we did before photo ID started, we just had to resurrect for them. We did a very good job of training. The 350 presentations I talked about did not include our outreach to clerks, but we had a number of meetings face-to-face with them in 2011, 2012, because we saw this as one of the biggest changes in election administration that most of us have seen in our lifetime. It's certainly not on the same par as extending suffrage, but it is big administratively for people in Wisconsin. And Wisconsin's always had a very high turnout, so we wanted to focus on these kind of things. The clerks have been very receptive on this, and we're promoting these resources as well because, they're connected in their municipalities, their local media outlets, that maybe they can drive them to some of this information.
You mentioned that you had learned some lessons from when this requirement had been in place for the special elections. What were some of the lessons that you've learned, and what, if anything, did they tell us about how this is going to play out in November when you have the high turnout election and you really have to?
Well, we're hoping that 3 elections before the high turnout help set the stage for this. And we're hoping, again, to have a lot more discussion on this in October of this year. But, the kind of lessons we learned were really what works, what's effective, in terms of communicating to the clerks and reminding them, making sure that they don't forget to train their poll workers on this issue. It was really that kind of give and take with the clerks. We didn't get, most of what they reported was, we didn't have any problems. And I can tell you that even observing elections, in 2011 we had a lot of elections due to the recalls. In 2012, we saw people, even when the photo ID law was not in place, prepared to show identification when they came in. We watched in 2011, before there were a number of special elections, including the recalls, where it was an optional show the ballot. So we think there's a pretty good groundwork already in Wisconsin. There's a lot of people who didn't even know that it was on hold. Again, we just know that there are groups of individuals, elderly, poor, minority, students, who are going to have a harder time being prepared, and we want to make sure that we do this kind of outreach so that they do bring the appropriate ID when they come to vote. Most of the votes are going to be in person, whether it's absentee or whether it's by absentee in person or at the polls. Yes?
And if you don't end up getting funding to pay for other ads or things, do you think what you're doing right now will be enough to get people educated?
I think you can always do more, but we're not going to sit on our hands on this. We will continue to do outreach. We'll continue to keep the message out there. If you look at, it's not on my tagline, but on a lot of our emails, it reminds people when they communicate with us that photo ID is in place to bring it to the ballot. We really want to encourage people. I think we were really happy with what we invested our resources on in 2011 to develop this type of advertising. I saw a couple of people smile. I assume it was the cheesehead in Paris. But, I think it's a simple message and it resonates. But again, we're trying to get people, you got to be prepared. You've got to be patient. You really got to persevere. But it can be done.
And do you have a ballpark for how much you spent this year updating materials?
We spent about $35,000, maybe a little bit more initial estimates. I just happened to look at that when we were talking to the board about it in April. We anticipated spending about $35,000. I think it went up a little from that to update these materials. We'll spend, I think, another 15 or 20 changing the logo, the G.A.B. reference after June 29th. Yes.
How cooperative have the colleges and universities been in Wisconsin and letting their students know what the students are going to need to have and preparing certificates for those students who need certificates?
Well, I wouldn't say it's a question of cooperation. They've definitely had outreach with us. One of the things we did back in 2011 and 2012 was lay the groundwork to have some really good lines of communication going. And we've had a lot of conversations with people at the universities since it's been resurrected. So it's not been a question of resistance. It's really been, we've got a very good dialogue going on. We did that with the Department of Transportation as well. But, the university system and private colleges were contacting us when it came back in. We've talked to them about, reminding them of the requirements. There's been a lot of discussion. There's been a lot of policy considerations that they've had to make, like whether they want to make their regular ID a permanent ID or whether they want to have a special ID. And those are decisions they have to make based on their own funding, because the way the legislature set it up for student IDs, it can only be valid for a 2-year period of time, and it does have that additional requirement. So we just updated the chancellor from Madison, sent out a blog earlier, found a couple things that we thought you needed to update. I think one of the election dates was wrong. So it's been very good. They've let us know what they're sharing. We've had a chance to look at their materials. So I guess in that sense, cooperation is a good thing.
So you've contacted the universities and colleges in the state, or they've contacted you? How did that go?
It's a two-way street. We do our own outreach to them in a sort of a general, remind them of all the communications we had in the past, encourage them to contact us.
So the UW system schools, for instance, are totally informed about this?
We have shared everything with them, yes. Other questions? I'm not going to ask anybody to show it before you leave, but again, we want to encourage you to avail yourself of the resources. You'll be hearing us restate this message over and over again throughout 2016, and we really think that it's important for people to be reminded of this, and again, I look forward to communicating with you in the future on this. Thank you.
There's hard copies of the news releases here. There's 2 of them. We've also got some posters. We've got some of these that show all the different types of acceptable IDs. So help yourself to any of the materials here.